we've reached the halfway point of this college football season, so I thought it was time to update my college football playoff field. Of course, we have 12 teams this year, so we'll go through each of the power conferences first, see if any of my conference champs changed, and then we'll do full bracket and prediction. So let's get started. First off, the ACC in the preseason, I had Miami over Clemson. I was really high on Miami. I picked Cam Ward to win the Heisman, and they've been pretty good this year. A couple of close calls their last couple of games against Cal and Virginia Tech that are a little bit concerning. And then Clemson, I expected them to lose to Georgia, and then I thought they would roll the rest of the way, and then eventually lose in the ACC championship. So for my updated prediction, it is still the same. The only thing I almost changed, because I'm sure most of you have Clemson and Miami in the ACC title right now. Maybe someone has SMU or something like that. But for the most part, everyone's going to have these two. But I did heavily consider picking Clemson over Miami because of seeing Miami's struggles against Cal going down 35-10, almost losing to Virginia Tech on that Hail Mary that some people thought Miami should have lost, controversial call there. And Clemson's been rolling, but they haven't faced the best competition. Ultimately, though, I think Clemson, the stock went a little too low after the Georgia loss, and now I think it's bordering getting a little too high because they haven't faced the best competition. And seeing Miami fight through those games and avoid the upsets when we've seen teams like Alabama go down, Tennessee go down, Notre Dame go down to Northern Illinois, all these big upsets, seeing Miami survive was actually impressive to me. And I think they're going to get to the ACC championship, and then having that star player like Cam Ward, I think, can get them to win. And then for my biggest changes for just the rest of the conference, these teams, and for the ACC, it's all negative. The ACC has really disappointed me. I thought, starting with Florida State, I believe I wasn't even as high as them. I wasn't even as high as them as most people. I picked them to go 9-3, finish fourth in the ACC. Obviously, they're not going to do that. They're just bad, just plain bad. They're the biggest changer in a negative way. Then NC State, I was really high on as well. Picked them to go finish third in the ACC, and actually thought they could be a playoff team. And Grayson McCall was not what I thought he would be, and then he's obviously had injuries as well, so we've had to play backup quarterback. The O-line's a lot worse than I thought it would be, and the defense under Dave Doeren is the worst I've seen, which was surprising to me. So they've also dropped a ton. Then UNC, I think I either picked 8-4 or 9-3 for them. Thought they could be like a sneaky team, borderline, like almost an ACC contender. But the quarterback goes down week one. Haven't gotten consistent play from the backups. Defense I thought would improve. It hasn't. So just a lot of disappointing teams for me in the ACC. So that's just kind of how I'm viewing the ACC differently from how I did at the start of the season. But yeah, we can move on to the Big Ten, where I had Oregon over Michigan. My thinking here was I thought Oregon, with Dylan Gabriel, the system would work really well. I thought they had a ton of weapons on the perimeter, really good O-line. I thought it'd be one of the best offenses in the country, and they had a really good defensive front that I thought would come together very well. And they had games like Ohio State at home, which we'll see this week. My thought process for Michigan, because I know I was going out on a pretty big limb here, not picking Ohio State to make the conference championship. But it was because Michigan, I thought, would lose to Texas early in the year, but I thought we were going to see development at the quarterback position over the course of the season, and I thought they had a manageable schedule until their last games against Oregon and Ohio State, where I thought the team would be peaking and be able to win. But the quarterback play has been it's been way worse than I could have imagined it being, and the O-line's been worse than I thought it would be. And the secondary is a lot worse than I thought it would be. Will Johnson's great, but aside from that, there's been some serious struggles. So I thought the defense was going to be the best in the country. It's just a good defense. I thought quarterback play would be better than it is. It's just bad. The offense is bad. And I say all that to say they will not be in my updated Big Ten championship. Who will? Well, I'll now have Ohio State, but I'll still have the Oregon Ducks as my Big Ten champion. I moved Ohio State up just because, one, I've been impressed with them. Two, probably should have already had them there. Probably had some bias in the preseason. I root for Michigan, so probably clouded judgment there. But looking at this Ohio State team, I'm sure other people did as well. I underestimated just how good Jeremiah Smith could be just instantly. Was pretty surprising to me. And the O-line's been better than I thought it would be as well. We'll see if it holds up against Oregon's D-line this week. But yeah, so preview of my Big Ten championship this weekend. If you saw my predictions, I picked Oregon to win narrowly because, one, they had home field, but two, when I see these teams, I see a pretty even matchup. I see it going down to the wire. And if that happens, when I think like who's going to make the big plays, I see, okay, they're kind of drawing even at wide receiver. Both have playmakers there. I like both their running backs. The O-lines both could be good, have some question marks. Ohio State probably has a little bit better defense, but I like Oregon's playmakers there as well. And I kind of have to evaluate the quarterback, and that's where Dylan Gabriel in the big game. I've seen him at Oklahoma beat Texas. I've seen him make the big plays, the big throws, or make plays with his legs as well. And Will Howard, I have a few more question marks. Will he throw a pick? Will he not be able to make a throw? So because of the quarterback edge of Dylan Gabriel over Will Howard, that's why I'm sticking with Oregon as my Big Ten champion. What have my biggest changes been from the Big Ten? Michigan dropping. We already covered that. Don't really need to go into it more. They obviously won't be making the Big Ten championship. But the other two are more positive. Indiana didn't. I think I either picked them to go 5-7 or 6-6. I might have picked them to miss a bowl game. And they're a solid top 25 team. Really manageable schedule. I actually I looked into them for making the Big Ten championship because of how manageable their schedule is outside of the Ohio State game. But they've been really, really surprising to me. I did not think in his first year, obviously Cignetti, great coach, was great at James Madison, but seeing what he's done in his first year is really impressive to me. And I underrated how good Curtis Rourke was. But yeah, huge start to the season for Indiana. It's good to see the program on the rise. Then pretty much the same story for Illinois. I didn't think they'd be a bowl team. I thought their defense was going to be really bad, but it's actually been a pretty decent defense. Luke Altmaier's been good. And the Illinois, I think they're back in the top 25 this week. So yeah, big ups to Indiana and Illinois, who I didn't think were going to be on this level. Moving on to the Big 12. In the preseason, I had Arizona over at Kansas State. I thought Noah Fifita was going to be a Heisman contender. I thought T-Mac was going to be the best receiver in the country, and I thought it'd lead to a pretty explosive offense. Kansas State, I thought Avery Johnson was going to be a really good quarterback. I really liked their run game. And then I thought I still think they're coached very well. So that was kind of my thought process there. Also, I am an Arizona fan, so there's a little bit of bias here. And there still is, because my updated prediction is Arizona over Iowa State. And yeah, I'm not sure that I fully believe this one, but I really want to see Arizona make the college football playoff, so I'm holding out hope for my preseason prediction. And the preseason, I definitely believed it. I really liked the team when evaluating them then. Now, seeing them lose to Texas Tech has given me pause because I thought that was a game they definitely should have won. On the Iowa State side, though, I believe I picked them third in the preseason in the Big 12. I did it. One of my first videos on the channel was why Iowa State is like the most likely team in college football to take a leap because of how much returning production they're bringing back on both sides of the ball. And I think we've seen it. I thought we saw it in the Iowa game, making plays down the stretch. And now them and BYU are the only undefeateds left in the Big 12. So they're really good. And I think if they get by this West Virginia game, then I'm really confident in them to make the Big 12 championship, because their only other road games left are Kansas and Utah, and Kansas has really struggled. So you could see a really, really highly ranked Iowa State team that maybe it doesn't have to be stuck at that 4 seed in the college football playoff. Could maybe, pass up an ACC champ, unlikely, but maybe an SEC champ or a Big Ten champ. But they could be in the fight for that 3 seed depending on how their schedule plays out. But I'm actually going with Arizona. And Arizona lost Kansas State, but it's not a Big 12 game. Lose to Texas Tech. That is a Big 12 game. So not much room for error left. But I think at some point, this offense is going to start clicking, because T-Mac is, I still think, the best receiver. But Noah Fifita's got to play at a higher level for me to get this prediction right. In terms of what are the other changes I've seen in the conference, we got to talk about Oklahoma State. I wasn't even, like another team, I wasn't as high on as other people. I picked them to go 8-4, I believe. A lot of people picked them to be in the Big 12 championship. But Ollie Gordon, and maybe it's not his fault, maybe it's the O-line, but it's just weird because the whole O-line's back, and Ollie Gordon, who was the best running back in college football last year, also back, and they just can't run the ball. They get dominated on the line of scrimmage. It's just really weird to see. Then they have to rely on quarterback play, which we knew was a weakness. So because they can't run the ball, they've been a huge disappointment. Then BYU, though, complete opposite. I didn't think this team was very good at all. I evaluated them, didn't have them as a bowl team, and I think I only predicted them to win 5 games, and I think they've already hit 5. They surprised me early in the year when they beat SMU. Then they surprised me again when they rolled Kansas State. That was a weird game, though. And then I picked them to lose to Baylor as well, and they've won that as well. So 3 games they've already surprised me with, and I'm hoping they don't do it again because they play Arizona in a couple weeks, and I'm probably going to pick Arizona to win. But BYU, I hope they could, finally don't prove me wrong for once. But the team has been a huge surprise to me. Definitely worthy of a top 25 ranking. I think they have the number 1 strength of record in the country, so it's just been really, really impressive for them. And ASU has also really impressed me. This was a team I thought was going to be really bad, but in year 2 under Kenny Dillingham, taking huge leaps. They crushed Wyoming. I know Wyoming's not very good. Beat Mississippi State, also one of the worst SEC teams, but it was how they beat them, right? They only had 69 passing yards, but Scatabo had 262 yards on the ground against an SEC team. I mean, that's, if you like, even if it's the worst SEC team, you told ASU they were doing that to any SEC opponent last year, they would not have believed you, right? So that's huge for this program. They're taking massive strides, and they have another huge game home against Utah this week, which I'm looking forward to. But yeah, I've been really impressed by ASU and BYU. So last conference that we have to break down before the bracket, and that is, of course, the SEC, where in the preseason I predicted Georgia over Alabama, and there's definitely been some crazy things going on in the SEC I didn't see coming. First off, I did not think Alabama would lose to Vanderbilt. I picked Alabama to beat Georgia in the preseason, so I wasn't surprised by that. But the Vanderbilt loss was truly shocking. And then other crazy things have happened as well. Tennessee loses to Arkansas, and I was actually low on Tennessee in the preseason. I was wrong on them. They're a lot better than I thought they were going to be. I think I picked them to go 8-4. They're clearly better than that. I was too. There's a lot of other things I'll talk about in a second. But in terms of, am I going to switch this pick? The real big player that comes in here is Texas, right? Texas has looked like maybe the best team in the country, and it was really hard for me to not put them in the title game. But ultimately, I'm actually still going the same 2 teams, but I'm going Alabama now to win the SEC title, which might seem crazy because they just lost to Vanderbilt, and Texas has looked so good. But my thought process here is I feel like it was just a letdown spot for Bama. I think the schedule is, the Tennessee game is going to be really tough. But if they get through a Tennessee game, LSU could be difficult. But aside from that, they should, if they're focused, obviously, because if they're not, they can lose like did the Vanderbilt game. I think they can still win out. And then Texas, I think, probably loses 1 game, and I think it's probably to Georgia, which is why I have Georgia getting in here, and Texas would be an 11-1 team that gets left out of the SEC title game because of tiebreakers. And then Alabama, Georgia, just because of what I saw in that game, I feel like Alabama was the better team. I know some people thought the second half was showing Georgia was a better team. The way I viewed it, I thought Alabama clearly looked better. So now in this game, I would pick Alabama to win the SEC. Biggest changes, Oklahoma has really disappointed me. I thought Jackson Arnold was going to be like a breakout star. Now he's not even the starting quarterback. I thought they'd have one of the best wide receiver corps in the country, and maybe they do, but it hasn't been healthy at all. Andrew Anthony, Jaleel Farouk, Nick Anderson have all been injured at points, and Deion Burks, I think he might have been injured even a little bit too. Now, like I mentioned, I touched on Tennessee. I underrated Tennessee. And then Vanderbilt, the Vanderbilt Commodores. I thought they were just going to, be the worst team in the SEC like usual, but no, they're out here taking down Alabama. I mean, I think my favorite story of college football this year is how Vanderbilt football is actually a pretty solid program. I love to see it. Beating Alabama was absolutely crazy. The highlight of the year so far in my book for college football, and it's something I'm glad I was wrong about in the preseason because it's awesome to see. But yeah, so those are all the updated conference championships picks. So now it's time to unveil my 12-team bracket. So here is what my bracket looks like. You can see my top 4. I actually have Miami still getting the number 1 overall seed like I did in the preseason. I know they've had a couple of scares recently, and I'm not confident in this one, but I still think the SEC and Big Ten are going to be too tough for anyone to go undefeated. And I'm actually still predicting Miami to go undefeated, even with the couple of close games they've had. Like we see my 4 conference champions there. Then we see other notables. Clemson got the 8, Penn State the 9. And this is the first time, if you see Iowa State at 11, the first time I'm predicting the Big 12 to get 2 teams in. Like I said, I'm not too confident in this because my Arizona pick, I feel like I'm going more with my heart than my head right now. And then Tulane, that was who I picked in the preseason to get the group of 5 spot. And I considered switching it. Boise State looks pretty good. UNLV's been pretty decent. But Tulane's also been really good. And it's just so up in the air right now that there's no one I'm super confident in. So I'm just sticking with Tulane. Their 2 losses are both to Power 4 opponents in Oklahoma and Kansas State. I think they could probably still win the American, get the final spot in the playoff. Nothing like I'm not too locked in on that, but that's what I'm going with there. So getting into these game by games, I'll give you the predictions for Clemson, Penn State. I really like Clemson. I've been high on them this whole season. I just had them losing at Georgia because of how good I think Georgia is. And then Miami, it's tough. Miami is another team I just happen to be really high on. Penn State is more just here as a product of their schedule being lighter. So I do like Clemson in this match to win this game and advance to the next round. Then Ohio State, Tulane, clearly going to be Ohio State there. I don't think it's talked about enough how the 5 seed is in a really good spot. Most years it'll probably end up like this because the Big 12 looks like it's going to be not the strongest of power conferences, and the 5 seed will probably either be the best team from the SEC or Big 10 to not win their conference title. And you can see this would be a highly coveted spot. Ohio State gets it here because I think Georgia having 2 losses to Bama is what I have right now, and Ohio State has 2 losses to Oregon. And I think Oregon would be ranked ahead of Alabama because Alabama's loss to Vanderbilt would be worse than an Oregon loss to right now. I'm still thinking it's kind of Michigan, but whoever it is, I think it'd be a worse loss for Vanderbilt than who Oregon loses to. So that's why Ohio State gets this 5th spot. You get to play the group of 5 team, which will generally be a win, and then the weakest power champion, and it's a pretty good path there. Then Georgia, I think, would easily beat Iowa State. Just too much of a talent deficit. And then Texas Ole Miss, we'd get an SEC showdown. Teams that didn't actually meet in the regular season, but would get to meet here. And I like Texas. I like Texas a lot. I have them going 11-1. It's just 1 loss to Georgia. But, Texas could be, depending on how the committee does it, I went with them keeping teams that went to the conference championship ahead of Texas. And in this case, it was easy because Georgia has the head-to-head in my, playing out the rest of the season. But it would be interesting to see if there was an 11-1 team that jumped over another 11-1 team that lost in the conference title game. So that'll be interesting to look at. But just looking at these matchups, Miami-Clemson would be a rematch of the ACC title, and Alabama-Georgia would be a rematch of the SEC title, and a third matchup of the season. So seeing 3 games of that series, some people maybe love that. I don't like it at all. But it's how I have it playing out here. And seeing Miami-Clemson play just a few weeks after the ACC title is something I also really don't like about this format that I think is kind of likely to happen. But so Miami at Clemson, I just predicted Miami to beat them in the ACC title. It'd be kind of weird to predict them to win that game at a neutral site but lose this one. So I'll go with Miami to win. And then, like I mentioned, Ohio State, Arizona. This is where my bias got to end. It hurts because I really don't like Ohio State and I really like Arizona, but I got to be objective here. Ohio State would win that game and set up a showdown with Miami. Then third matchup between Alabama and Georgia. Again, Alabama, I picked them in the regular season, and I just picked them to win the SEC title. I don't like that they'd be playing a third time. It'd be really weird, but it doesn't make sense for me to pick them to win on a neutral site then lose the next time. That just feels kind of random. Try to be more consistent here, and I'll go with Alabama to win for a third time. And if this does play out, obviously I'm going to get things wrong here, but if this played out like this, the ramifications for Kirby Smart for having a 3-loss season all just being to Alabama would be, the Georgia fan base would be so mad. It would be a crazy scene. Like I said, this isn't likely to happen, but it's definitely a possibility. And it would just be crazy how mad Georgia, the fan base would be at Kirby. It would be fun to watch from the outside, but man, can you imagine if Alabama beat Georgia 3 times in a single year, and that was the only games Georgia lost. Then Oregon, Texas. This is a really good matchup. This has been, out of all the games, the hardest one to pick for me. Alabama, Georgia is obviously very hard to pick, but because I've already made the pick, it's easier. Same with Miami, Clemson, who I both think are really close teams, but I've already made those picks. These teams would be seeing each other for the first time, and would definitely be, if this was the slate, the game I'd most be looking forward to, just so you get to see a new matchup between these top teams. I think this would go down to the wire. I think both have really good skill talent. I think Texas has slightly better QB with how well Quinn Ewers is playing. The O-line's been better, but Oregon, I think, is improving. And this is one of those games where it's just 50-50 for me. Could easily see Texas winning, but I'm just barely leaning Oregon to advance and set up a semifinal matchup between Alabama and Oregon, and we get to see that Kalen DeBoer, Dan Lanning storyline. Either way here, if Oregon advanced, either seeing Dan Lanning versus Kirby Smart would be awesome, or Dan Lanning versus Kalen DeBoer. All would make for good storylines there. Heading back up top, though, I've been high on Miami, had them as the number 1 seed. I have Cam Ward winning the Heisman is my prediction, but I don't think there's enough on this team, or they're well enough coached to overcome just how good Ohio State is. I think Ohio State would torch this Miami secondary, even if I don't believe in Will Howard as much. I think the Ohio State is clearly more talented across the board than Miami, and I think Ohio State would get this win and advance to the national championship. Then back to Alabama, Oregon. Like I said, Kalen DeBoer, Dan Lanning's really what it comes down to for me. I like both these teams a lot. I think they both have high upside, but we've seen the downside and how they could lose to anybody. But I think having time to prepare and these teams giving their best performances, I like Jalen Milroe at quarterback a little more. I like Kalen DeBoer as a coach a little more. And I like Alabama to advance to the national championship. It's crazy to say. I'm picking just a week after they lose to Vanderbilt. I'm basically predicting them to just run the table, and they just lost to Vanderbilt. So definitely an interesting decision on my part to just roll with Bama the rest of the way. But that's what I'm going with. So for my national championship, I have Alabama and Ohio State. This would be really fun to see 2 of the 3 most talented teams in the sport. And what would this game kind of look like? I think Ohio State would has the receivers to go at this Alabama secondary, which could be a weak point. But I think Alabama has the strength of having Jalen Milroe, who can give like a superhuman performance at quarterback in a way Will Howard can't. It'd be interesting to see Kalen DeBoer versus Ryan Day. I'd be more on Kalen DeBoer's side for that. Alabama O-line probably holds it better than Ohio State's does, but Ohio State has the better D-line. Who could control the line of scrimmage would be interesting to see. I'm sure there'd be debates between who's better between Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams. 2 of the biggest fan bases, biggest brands. It would be really fun to see. This pick's actually not too hard for me because Ohio State, in my mind, I wasn't going into this I'm picking Ohio State to make the national championship. If Ohio State had ran into Georgia, I would have picked Georgia. If they would have ran into Texas, I would have picked Texas. If they ran into Oregon, I'd probably pick Oregon. Right now, I think Ohio State's 5th for me in terms of my contenders, below Alabama, Georgia, Oregon, and Texas. But because of their path, I had it being easier, and they end up in the national title. But for me, it's clear that I would pick Alabama in this matchup just because it's really quarterback. It's hard for me to see Will Howard with the limitations I think he has leading Ohio State to a national championship, even with all this talent around him. And I know what Stetson Bennett just did at Georgia a couple years ago, and if you would have asked me then, I would have been saying the same thing. But I think it's kind of an outlier. I think the team that's going to have the star quarterback that like Jalen Milroe versus a team that just has a guy, just a regular guy in Will Howard, I've got to go with them to win the title. So I'm sticking with my preseason prediction, going Alabama, even after this loss to Vanderbilt, to win the national championship and run the table the rest of the way. I'm sure nothing will go wrong with any of the predictions I made today. But let me know, guys, who do you have making the 12-team playoff? Who do you have winning the national title? And then are you guys looking forward to the 12-team playoff, or do you wish we were still in the 4-team era? I'm on the side of wishing it was still a 4-team playoff. But thank you guys for watching. Make sure to leave a like, do me a huge favor, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.